Hey everybody, Joe here from the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. If you enjoy what we do here on the show and you think it's worth your hard-earned money, you can support the show via Patreon. Just a $1 donation gets you access to bonus episodes, our Discord, and regular episodes before everybody else. If you donate at an elevated level, you get even more bonus content. A digital copy of my book, The Hooligans of Kandahar, and a sticker from our Teespring store. Our show will always be ad-free and is totally supporter-driven. We use that money to pay our bills, buy research materials that make this show possible, and support charities like the Kurdish Red Crescent, the Flint Water Fund, and the Halo Trust. Consider joining the Legion of the Old Crow today. And now back to the show. Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Lions Led by Donkeys podcast. I am Joe, and with me to complete the series is Liam. Hello, Liam.
Is it a series of its two parts?
A duology.
This is just a shitty sequel.
Yeah, it's never as good as the original.
A duology. There you go. Now, lower your expectations, folks. Hunger has set in.
I skipped lunch. Now, if you are listening to this, where we left off last week is that the U.S. is getting ready to invade Mexico. If you're Liam, we left off about 5 minutes ago. I have him trapped into this room for 2 hours.
Hey, guys.
So when we left you last week, Pancho Villa and his boys raided across the U.S.-Mexico border directly into the path of a shoeless man manning a machine gun, achieving virtually nothing.
And nearly melting the barrel.
I almost killed so many of you, I destroyed my gun. They achieved virtually nothing but pissing off the U.S. government that had already showed itself very comfortable with invading Mexico from time to time. Now, commander of the Southern Department, which is, I guess is what it was called back then, General Frederick Funston, telephoned the War Department the day after the Villa raid, saying, quote, "I urgently recommend that American troops be given authority to pursue into Mexican territory hostile Mexican bandits who raid American territory. So long as the border is a shelter for them, they will continue to harass our ranches and towns to our chagrin." I guess he's not one for rough language. Now, Funston is a weird guy who, like a lot of American generals of the day, were something of like their career was something of a Forrest Gump journey across the world in the age of early American imperialism. This brought him to the Philippines, where he was awarded the Medal of Honor. And before that, he fought in Cuba with Cuban revolutionaries against the Spanish. Also, at one point in 1906, during the 1906 earthquake, he was in command of a base called the Presidium in California. And he had declared martial law, despite the fact he was not allowed to do that. Yeah.
Oh, sick.
During this time in martial law, he ordered looters to be shot on sight, which ended with armed soldiers and civilians wildly opening fire on numerous innocent bystanders, and also maybe some looters. Yeah, he's kind of a bastard.
That's superb.
Gentlemen, I've come up with a way to stop disorder in the wake of the earthquake. We will simply do the purge. So Funston is a real bastard. He figured as commander of the Southern Department and the one who responded to the mess, he would be given command of any invasion of Mexico, which the War Secretary, which is what the Department of Defense was called back then, and the president had already kind of sort of signed up for. But he wasn't. To Funston's actual surprise, it was John Blackjack Pershing who would be given command.
This motherfucker.
Which, of course, he'd be mostly known for to be the future commander of the American Expeditionary Force in World War I. And he was going to be the one given command to pursue Villa into Mexico. Also, I'm 100% guilty here. I actually never knew where his name his nickname came from before. Were you aware of where his nickname came from before?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope.
So he was given that nickname because at one point he commanded an all-black cavalry unit out west. That was it. That was it.
Okay.
So they called him. It wasn't Blackjack. It was Blackjack. like Jack, who works with black people. Yeah. Suddenly I'm not comfortable ever calling him by his nickname ever again.
So John Pershing.
John Pershing. General Pershing, yes. Now, Funston would remain in command of the Southern Department, while Pershing who doesn't have a nickname, would be in charge of the expeditionary force, meaning he was technically his subordinate. But Funston wanted to go do war stuff with his friends, and this meant that he fucking hated Pershing and was a conniving dickhead to him the entire time. So we know now that the two commanders of the expeditionary force are something of catty bitches to one another. Let's talk about the army that they were going to use for this expedition. Now, like we pointed out the last episode, the majority of the soldiers being massed at the border were National Guardsmen. Much like during, if you remember all the way back during our Philippine War series, the U.S. still did not have much of a standing regular army. And, like we talked about the last episode, early American history was kind of like really hated a large standing military, something we have totally discarded.
Forgotten.
Yeah. Yeah.
Bucket.
And like the idea was that the U.S. Army would be the federalized military, while the real power lay in the militias or the National Guard, which are modern militias now, not fucking your country uncle with an AR. Instead, the regular army was kept very small, only big enough really to be deployed to crush native people whenever any of them dared to deserve to want equal rights. Like, for instance, when the government deployed 14,000 federal troops south, it accounted for almost the entire army. So when something like this happened, they would have to call up huge numbers of National Guard. By the end of the expedition, every single state other than Nevada, weirdly enough, would send the National Guard south. And that's because they didn't have one yet.
Whatever.
Today, the National Guard soldiers go through the exact same training as regular soldiers do. Like, when you go to basic training, there'll be people in your class who are National Guardsmen. When you go, like when I went to tank school, a large portion of my class is National Guardsmen. There's really no functional difference. Though, of course, regular army soldiers will bitch and complain about they're just so much better, and they're not. Back then, it was much, much different. Guardsmen would be trained in their home state by their own trainers. Hypothetically, basic training was the same. And it really was in most places, as training in the army back then was mostly just like how to march with a little bit of marksmanship thrown in. Also, many states found that the amount of men they had on paper was not actually accurate for the amount of men that were in the National Guard. For example, in New York, guardsmen wouldn't have to take a physical exam to determine if they were fit for service until they were called up. That meant, the New York National Guard has 5,000 people in it. Oh, fuck, it's actually 20. That meant that a lot of these dudes all showed up and able to run a lap around the building or missing fingers or whatever. And I'm not pulling this out of my ass. This is from the actual National Guard historian website. Quote, across the nation, the sheer number of soldiers who had to be examined created a problem. Equally troublesome, the number of prospective soldiers had failed a rudimentary physical were staggering. The reasons were varied, included venereal disease, defective vision, hernias, bad teeth, obesity, overall poor physique, underweight or overweight, amputations or deformities. Like, you could just like go sign up like a list, like, yeah, I'm totally in the Guard. You don't have to do anything though. I'm not even going to make you do a physical. I see you're missing an arm. That won't become a problem until later.
It's weight savings, man. Don't shame me.
In some places, the Guard had to reject a full quarter of the people they actually had on their rolls. Again, this is from the National Guard website. Quote, when the final mobilization records were tallied, the state that had the lowest rate of rejections was Colorado with 10%, while Ohio topped the list with 25%. See? Fuck you, Ohio.
Not a real state.
Arkansas,
notably.
Similar rejection of 870 out of 2,000 that were examined at the Little Rock mobilization site proved that Ohio was not alone in their shortcomings. For the 14 Midwest states that made up the Army's Central Department, the average number of rejections was over 15%. The New York Adjutant General John O'Reilly, would later point out that the basic fallacy in the system, physical exams should take place before an enlistee joins the unit, not while getting ready to deploy. No shit.
Thanks, dude.
This is like not having a job interview until you go to your first day at the job. Like, what do you mean you're not a doctor? You said you were a doctor. Well, Sure, I lied.
I lied.
You said you're an engineer. Well, I mean, I'm sure I'm still good enough to build a condo in Miami.
Oh, Joe.
Now, when they finally did get mustered and sent off to camps to catch up on training, it was further discovered that the War Department did not plan ahead at all. If you were going to pick like 3 things for these guardsmen to go train, what do you think they would need?
Guns.
Yes. What would be number 2?
Ammo.
Yes. What about number 3? What if I told you I didn't have any of those?
Oh, that's not very good.
There was
This whole company is not very good at their jobs.
There wasn't enough guns, water, boots, food, or even basic uniforms for the camps at first. Many
Lord, man. God,
many units only trained by marching around with sticks instead of guns before being sent south, hypothetically, to war.
This is my rifle. This is my stick.
Go cut a switch so you can pretend to be a soldier. This is one of the reasons why, despite there being around 140,000 guardsmen being called up, only a handful of regiments would actually be sent over the border into Mexico, with the main force being the federalized army being somewhat better trained and organized. Now, if you look,
I feel like someone's doing a lot of work there.
They at least had boots on them, I guess. Now, and the National Guard historian would argue that no National Guard units crossed the border into Mexico. There is enough evidence to prove that is not entirely correct. But the vast, and it wasn't the Guard that came up with the idea that they're not going to go over the border. Like, the commanders like, holy shit, we can't use these guys. Well, the Guard tripped of their own dick to mobilize a massive amount of people quicker than anyone had in 1916 had any business of doing in the U.S. government. The U.S. also managed to pull off a lot of firsts that would end up being something of a practical practice for the upcoming World War that they would find themselves in. This included using planes and truck convoys for the first time. Now remember, 1916. Planes have been around for like 15 years. Pretty fucking new.
America.
Granted, it was 1916, so these planes and trucks sucked and broke down and fell out of the sky with alarming regularity.
America.
Now, originally, one surprise party to this exposition was the Mexican government itself, led by Carranza. Well, I can agree. We can all probably agree that this was an invasion of Mexico at large, but it was done so with, at least at first, the consent of the Mexican government. And this is mostly because it was a way to avoid an all-out war with the U.S. Carranza originally refused to allow U.S. soldiers across the border, pointing out that he too was at war with Villa and he would use his own military to track him down and bring him to justice. The U.S. refused this for 2 reasons. One, they did not trust Carranza and figured that he would take the side to protect Villa, despite the fact that the U.S. is still supporting the government of Mexico, and also because of optics. News of a raid on Columbus had spread rapidly across the U.S., and to be fair, a lot of the reporting done on the raid was blown wildly out of proportion to make it look 100 times worse than it actually was. Some good old yellow journalism. While it wasn't the first raid of the border into the U.S., it was certainly the largest, and the American people and government wanted revenge. And there was a whole lot less flair than getting that kind of allied government to do it for you. It is virtually the same reason why, after 9/11, the Taliban government in Afghanistan's like, yeah, we'll give you Osama bin Laden. Just like, you have to recognize us as the government. And we were like, no,
fuck that. We're going to wage a pointless war instead. God damn you. We already paid.
You do not have to hand it to the Taliban. However, they gave us a way out. Now, you could also theorize that there was no functional way the Taliban could deliver Osama bin Laden to us, which, sure, fine. But the offer was on the table. And that's the thing, is like, you want to look like you're doing something good, right? You want to no, look, we as the government are doing something to protect you, not like, yeah, they're going to go catch him for us. We'll be good. It's stupid.
Thanks, the Taliban.
Our good friends, the Taliban. Friends of the pod, the Taliban.
Cut that out.
So after a week of mild threats, Carranza caved, allowing U.S. forces into Mexico as long as they did not leave the state of Chihuahua. Though Carranza did manage to get one final fuck you before the operation began, refusing to allow the U.S. access to the Mexican railways for resupply. This was done for no reason other than, I hate you. Like,
for him,
functionally,
man.
it did not matter. This forced the U.S. to use horses and the aforementioned shitty Dodge pickup trucks. I assume their quality has improved somewhat. I don't know. I'm not a truck guy. Another way the Mexican people, government, and rebels all worked together to fuck with U.S. soldiers would be to constantly cut telegraph lines as they advance, which is kind of hilarious. So
fantastic.
on March 15th, 1916, the U.S. Army crossed the border into Mexico in 3 separate columns and quickly learned that holy shit was the U.S. military not ready to pull off something quite like this. Villa had a hell of a lot of time to get a head start and had no plans to sit and fight the entire might of the U.S. military with his handful of stolen guns that he had gotten a couple weeks ago. Even if it was held together with horses, old-timey trucks, and dudes who trained with tree branches, it was still a much better fighting force than anything Villa could muster. Instead, he got the fuck out of the way, forcing the U.S. to go on one hell of a hike and immediately running out of their own supply lines. Now, this is something that's like common with a lot of invading forces, is that most commanding generals are combat soldiers once upon a time. Like, they come from cavalry or infantry or tanks or whatever. Like, none of these guys are logistics generals. So they're like, no, we're going to deploy these soldiers to go fight. And meanwhile, all the people who are desperately trying to bring you food and ammo can't keep up with you. Like, it's like a tale as old as like Napoleon did it. Fucking Hitler did it. Everybody does it eventually.
You know who did do it? General Sherman, man. If we don't have supply lines, they don't have
That is
supply
one way
lines,
to do
baby.
it, yeah. Within a short amount of time, Pershing was over 400 miles into Mexico, which doesn't seem like it's that long, but remember, it's 1916, and most of these guys have no idea what they're doing. It was also around this time that he learned, unfortunately, that the U.S. military in its totality did not have enough trucks or pack animals to supply the expedition. This forced the Secretary of War to pull nearly $500,000 out of somewhere, nobody's entirely sure where, to buy literally any truck or horse he could find. Yeah, that's like $12 million in today dollars, which, like, if the military today was attempting to spend that much money, they would get nothing for it because it's only $12 million. But back then, it was a lot of fucking money for the Secretary of War to be throwing around.
1/2 of one and four.
Through the requisition process, we got you this magazine spring. Now, on the flip side, the acquisition of these pack animals and trucks did not go great because, say, if you happen to have a whole bunch of busted-ass trucks that barely ran, half-dead pack animals, and suddenly the government's like, we will pay you literally any amount of money if you give us your trucks. What are you going to do with those trucks? You're going to pawn them off on the government. And that's exactly what happened.
Oh, yeah.
Like, they could dictate the prices for their worst pack animals and trucks and just make the government pay them obscene amounts of money. And admittedly, the government was not in a place to refuse. It's not like trucks were everywhere in 1916. Like, there's only so many.
Right.
So when they finally got the trucks they needed so their soldiers could eat and shoot their guns, maybe, they realized that all the roads marked on their map either simply did not exist or were completely worthless when it rained. Furthermore, a lot of these trucks just could not handle rough terrain, and they broke down constantly when they had to drive off of what we would consider a road. Now, this breakdown forced engineers to build roads for the army to march on, slowing the entire process down. Or even funnier, sometimes that the trucks were so incredibly unreliable, they had to hook them up to pack animals and then pull them. Like, this Dodge truck has two.
Yeah,
this Dodge truck has literally 2 horsepower. Way to go, team! It's the first Ram.
This is called efficiency.
Yeah. I believe that's how Dodge Rams are still marketed. Pershing also found the vaunted planes that were going to act as his recon element were pretty much suicidally useless. Now, they were using biplanes, and these are early American biplanes. Now, there would be a lot of evolution in flight technology as World War I wore on, because people learned that you could drop bombs from them and shit. We're not using those planes. Those aren't the planes we're using.
Plus, we have the Battle of Blair Mountain to test out bombing people.
And like at this point, these are unarmed planes, but they also were planes that could barely fly. Their biplanes made out of mostly canvas and wood, and they couldn't do their job because they didn't have enough power to overcome the winds that came off of the mountains of northern Chihuahua. So, like, a lot of these guys are trying to get over the mountains and then crashing and dying, or just having to turn around, which is kind of hilarious. Like, no, we got these new revolutionary technologies for you. It's called a plane. It's going to be able to recon Pancho Villa, and he's not going to be able to do anything about it. Okay. Never mind. You can't use any of the planes. We hit a surprise snag. This being a terrain feature that's been here for millions of years.
It's crazy how that works out.
All of these things aside, the U.S. assumed they'd still be able to find Villa. After all, not only had he been raiding across the border for supplies as his power dwindled, he had been raiding Mexican towns and villages, turning some amount of the population against him. So, when American forces rolled into these villages, assuming that the townspeople would help them, they were shocked to find out that they were very unpopular, and they would not tell them shit. Now, if you're listening...
Those fuckers.
Yeah, of course this is what fucking happened. It's the exact same reason that, like, all of those, the previous revolutionary groups worked with Carranza, because they hated Huerta, not because they liked each other. These villagers probably do hate Villa, but they also hate Americans way more who invaded their country. Again, the theory of fuck that guy. Now we are that guy. That's all it is. Look at, like, any popular resistance movement as soon as, like, the unifying enemy leaves. Afghanistan, either with the Soviets or the British, the Soviets, or us in a few years. Like, what we consider a unified is going to crumble and start fighting each other because they don't have anything to unify around anymore. So now we're helping unify Mexico by making everybody hate us. But after 2 weeks of running around in circles, not finding shit, and only getting the occasional skirmish with Villa's forces, elements of the 7th Cavalry finally ran into a large force of Villa's men at the town of Guerrero. Unfortunately for the men of the 7th, this is not the set-piece battle they had hoped for, because that's like one of the things that they continually, like, is the through line for this entire expedition. At no point does Villa, like, this is where we're gonna sit and defend and fight these guys, because
he's a raider. Why would he do that?
Exactly. And that's like the thing that, like, Pershing's like, we'll corner him eventually and he'll have to fight us. Like, no, the fuck he won't.
No, he doesn't.
He'll die running.
Just go home.
It's a much better option to die running. Now, the men had just undergone a 55-mile march to the Sierra Madre Mountains in just 17 hours. Now, admittedly, this is on horseback, but that does mean that their horses are fucking exhausted. They might not be, but they're a cavalry unit, which is more important here. And just before that, they had marched 400 miles in 14 days. So they're not exactly...
Fuck that.
Yes, exactly. I have ridden a horse on, like, I think 2 occasions. Incredibly uncomfortable. I can't imagine riding that for 400 fucking miles. These guys had burned through much of their supplies of food and water in order to get to the town where they heard Villa's men were held up. When they finally got there and found it to be well defended and surrounded by a thick wall that would stop gunfire. It also didn't help with their civilian guy, a white guy who swore up and down that he knew the area like the back of his hand, got lost continuously along the way, prolonging the entire march, which is just lovely. I mean,
that's fantastic.
Shout out to that guy for bilking the government out of, I assume, as a decent-sized paycheck.
Now I'm going to start a company called Blackwater.
I'm going to go join the Dakota National Guard. Soldiers of the 7th were ordered to surround the town, which was made impossible because it had mountains on 2 sides of it. Who would have thought? Which Villa's men, unlike the guide they hired, really did know like the back of their hand and used the terrain for cover. There was no real unifying force amongst Villa's men other than not wanting to stick around and fight. One group took off running, engaged in a running horseback gun battle like some baller ass shit out of a cowboy movie with the Americans as they went, though. Yeah, like, I am not a great marksman. However, I can assure you I'd be a terrible marksman on horseback. And it really seems like most of these guys were too. Because this is not the first running gun battle, or this is not going to be the last running gun battle on horseback we talk about in this episode. And the casualties are very, very low. It's because nobody could aim. Like, you're just like bouncing around the back of a wild animal, firing a rifle wildly over its head. Nobody's hitting fucking
Pacifism
anything.
through missing.
That's right. Now, another group of Villa's men within Guerrero simply walked out of the town. Now, their whole master plan was, we'll pretend to be the Mexican National Army. I bet these fucking gringos are too stupid to tell the difference. They were right. They just walked out and pretended to be Carranza's soldiers, who were, remember, supposedly, technically allies of the U.S. government. And they,
we got bamboozled, sir.
Yeah. Nevertheless, we will try. You want to guess how exactly they tricked the Americans?
They just walked out and said, "Oh, we killed them all."
No, they simply picked up a Mexican flag and walked out with it.
Oh my god!
And the Americans like, checks out. Good enough. Come on by, boys. Now, in the running battle, one of Villa's close friends was killed, and people believe they actually may have wounded Villa, but that was just a rumor. There's actually no evidence that Villa was even in Guerrero at the time. And like, even though the U.S. considers this the most successful battle of the entire expedition, there's no evidence that Villa was actually there at all. And actually, the reason why that the fleeing soldiers got away is because the cavalry troopers' horses were so tired from the march they couldn't keep up. Otherwise, they would have definitely seen that Villa wasn't there. But right. Yeah, like I said, this event is considered the most successful battle of the expedition. So much so that the man in charge of it, Colonel George Dodd, was promoted to brigadier general and became a national hero. I assume the bar was very low back then. The bar is low now. Dodd himself must not have been very proud of all of this because he retired that same month, just 23 days later. Now, despite this ongoing clusterfuck, Pershing, no nickname given, insisted things were going fine, and morale was just as good as the day the expedition began. And then the Battle of Parral happened. On April 13th, a force around 150 cavalry soldiers under the command of Frank Tompkins walked into the town of Parral. The town was thought to be a resting spot, and they had been told along the way by members of the National Army, I assume maybe also Villa's guys just holding a flag, that they would be greeted by Mexican soldiers when they got there. But when they got to the town, they were not welcomed. Instead, a Mexican general, Ismael Lozano, told Tompkins that him and his men should fuck off or there'd be problems. Thompson, knowing the delicate diplomacy at play, realized that he and his men should leave before something popped off between him and the possible elements of the National Army. The tired soldiers got back on their horses and began to leave the town. While they were about a half mile away, Tompkins heard someone shout from back in the city, "Viva Villa!" And then a force of 500 National Army cavalry soldiers charged out at them, guns drawn.
Oh, boy.
Now, Tompkins knew that if he stood and fought, his very outnumbered unit would be overwhelmed. So instead, they fought a delaying fighting withdrawal for 8 miles on horseback until they got back to the fortified American town of Santa de Cruz de Villegas. Sorry, guys. In the running battle, both sides took very few casualties, but the entire expedition was changed because of it. American forces stuck by the strict rules put in place by Carranza. While they were over 500 miles from the border, they were still in Chihuahua State, like the state that they were told by Carranza they had to stay there. And there is no evidence that Carranza ordered General Lozano to attack the Americans. But after it happened, he just rolled with it and refused to apologize for the actions of his soldiers, which, fair enough. Whatever.
Yeah, well, hey, man.
Yeah, sometimes you just gotta own it.
They're gonna do what they're gonna do, and I'm gonna open this beer. Good luck to you.
President Carranza, your general attacked us. Yeah, so what?
Why don't you tell him to suck a dick if he hates someone?
But I thought you said you wouldn't. Yeah, I did. And then it happened anyway. Yeah. Uh-huh. You going somewhere with this? See, my secret is I can't order my generals not to attack you because I don't control them, sir. What was really happening was the American presence in the country had temporarily ended the war between Villa and Carranza. And many soldiers were simply joining Villa to get a crack at the U.S. as they went by. Like, so.
Oh, it's crazy how that would happen.
And there's even like parts that like Lozano could have joined Villa, or also like the so-called National Army soldiers were like, oh, we're with Villa for now. And then like, oh, we're at the National Army when the Americans leave. Like, they didn't care. They didn't give a shit about Villa. Like, is the goddamn principle of the matter, right?
Right.
Carranza was either unwilling or unable to stop them from doing it, and many of his generals were more than willing to play sides. And I'm sure on Carranza's side, it was both. It doesn't have to be one or the other. He was both unwilling and unable. At any point, if he pissed off his generals who wanted to fight the Americans, I mean, they just turned on him. He knows how he came to power. Like, everybody already did this once. I shouldn't make them not hate me. Which is kind of like ironic, as the concept of fighting for Villa was more than an idea at this point. Because remember, Villa and his forces were rendered militarily useless, right? There's no Villa army at this point. Like, the concept of like fighting for Pancho Villa or Viva Villa is more of a vibe. It just means fuck the Americans, which fine.
Fair.
Cool.
We deserve it.
After running from the U.S., it caused Villa's men to desert him, and the Battle of Guerrero smashed one of their last large units still in the field. Villa really wasn't a threat to anyone at this point. He was just managing to escape the Americans, almost certainly with the help of the Carranza administration and the Mexican military at several different layers and levels. But like, the main thing that he was doing was just not getting caught, which, sure, whatever.
George Washington was brilliant at retreating, and he's the father of the country. So.
You don't actually have to win battles to win a war. I mean, ask the Taliban.
Right.
What is even worse is that before the Battle of Parral, it was almost certain the expedition was going to wrap up. The military and the U.S. government was coming to the conclusion that it actually looked pretty bad for them to be chasing a single dude throughout Mexico. And only 4 days before the Battle of Parral, the Secretary of War said that Pershing had accomplished everything he was going to, and the soldiers should turn around and come back. Which is like taking your ball and going home with the military. Well, like they were realistic. Like, we're never going to fucking capture this guy.
Right.
But after Parral, Pershing was fucking pissed. He demanded he be allowed to shift the expedition from what it was into an actual invasion of Mexico at large, taking the entire state and entire capital of that state in Chihuahua. This is nuts, and thankfully, this was refused. So you're probably wondering what made Mexico and the U.S. back down from almost certain all-out war at this point. Because at this point, the same excuse can't be used as Veracruz, right? Like, you're already committed. Right. Well, neither side really could wage a full-on war if they wanted to. The U.S. figured if they wanted to start the second Mexican-American War for real, they would need up to another 100,000 troops. Remember, they already have
ones with arms this time,
yeah, and they've already gotten rid of about a quarter of the other guys that wanted to sign up. They'd probably have to start a draft,
right?
Which they just didn't have another 100,000 soldiers. Remember, they already have 140,000 at the border, and even if they did start a draft, they did not have the means to arm, equip, or train these guys. But Wilson also couldn't order a withdrawal. It would make his administration look weak, and it was during, what else? An election cycle. Yeah.
Of course. Why'd I fucking ask?
Of course, this is all very stupid, but the votes are, yes, of course. So instead, the U.S. advance into Mexico simply stopped. And instead, they pulled back closer to the border, and made like this kind of weird, sort of not, sort of is occupation force without any real mission or goal.
Just sort of hung out, or
yeah, I mean, some missions were still carried out. Like, there was raids. Like, for one instance, a young lieutenant you may have heard of, George Patton, carried out the first motorized assault.
Yes, I've heard of Patton.
Yes, noted bastard, Lieutenant, future general.
Guy's a real asshole, as it turned out.
Critical support to the scooter that killed him. Now, maybe it was a car accident. I don't remember. I think it was a motorcycle or a scooter. But anyway, he carried out the first motorized assault in U.S. military history, which I only bring this up because it amounted to being a drive-by.
You win some, you lose some.
So this it was a possible via strong point, and he was sitting inside of a Dodge touring car during a mission, and it started as a quest to go buy corn.
And just happened to let off with a gat?
Yeah, like he ended up getting in a gunfight with a revolver out the door of his fucking touring car, which
gave them the Suge Knight. Yeah.
He also ran them over and dangled them over a fucking balcony over the Ice Baby. Noted CEO of Death Row Records, George S. Patton. I hope that's a Photoshop that someone makes that absolutely nobody's going to understand outside the listeners of the show. And honestly, fuck Patton. Obviously, we don't like him, but that also is the most Patton thing I've ever heard. Other than him,
yeah, that's pretty far up there.
Other than him, like smacking soldiers around for having PTSD. Like, I'm gonna go out and get corn. Oh, surprise drive-by occurs. Also making history. Lil Patton.
Little Pat.
But in general, for the most part, soldiers in this occupation didn't really do anything. They had nothing to do.
Just vibes, bro.
And like, there's nowhere to go. So like, soldiers sat around gambling and drinking away their paychecks because they had nowhere else to spend it. Like,
good for them.
At this point, casualties in the expedition came mostly from accidents, and it's probably from being drunk and fighting each other over poker and shit. Mm-hmm. Now, there was one main threat to soldiers, and that is the specter of wandering off the base to find a hooker and catching the clap.
Yeah.
Now, you think I might...
To this day, you know.
Some people are probably thinking we're joking here, but according to General Pershing, this was in fact true. So, rather than telling you what the system is that he instituted, I'm simply going to read off directly from the National Guard archives here, and I'm going to let you put a title on it, okay? And it gets dark. Now, again, this is directly from the National Guard archive. I did not editorialize anything here, in case anybody thought I was trying to like make things sound worse. But, quote, another feature of the camp at Colonia Dublin were the numerous Mexican prostitutes who followed the troops. To prevent men from leaving camp, Pershing had the prostitutes rounded up and placed under guard in a specially graded barbed wire stockade. Soldiers wishing to visit the stockade were required to show the guard on duty the necessary fee that was regulated by the provost marshal. After completing business with one of the visiting ladies, a soldier is required to take a prophylactic provided by the army. The result was a strict sanitary measure that was one of the lowest venereal disease rates an army had ever known. Sex slaves. They had sex slaves.
Yeah, that's what that is.
And
congratulations, everybody.
And in case you're wondering, the provost marshal is in charge of the military police. So this was a rape stockade guarded by cops. I
hate this place.
And if anybody says that, well, it's different, they're paying him.
No.
Fuck you.
Fuck you.
Why were they in barbed wire? Why were they rounded up? Like, that's what this is.
Let the sex slaves run off.
Yes. Yeah, I'm going to break into your house and steal your TV and leave you a crisp 20 on the counter. Are we good? I think not.
That's so fucked up.
So, U.S. Army has some explaining to do on their Mexican sex slaves.
Gotta go ahead and assume they're just, who gives a shit?
Also, honestly, I'm not shocked this happened. You've listened to the show enough before you became a host on it. I've been doing this 160 fucking episodes at this point. This part doesn't shock me. What does shock me is that this was like touted as a good measure on the National Guard's website. Like, this is one of those things that you just bury.
Like, that doesn't even shock me. Just the dumbest people doing the dumbest shit.
Is it?
Like, I should be shocked, but like, I'm not. I'm just like, yeah, that seems like something they'd be like, yeah, like, we did it. guys.
If I was the historian for the Army National Guard, like, guys, we can take that part out.
We can put this
like,
down.
Nobody's making us flex on this.
Yeah.
We could say regrettably, and then the same paragraph.
Yes. You don't have to be like this.
Yeah. That's like the I don't know, the U.S. Army Air Corps bragging about the British Air Corps, the Royal Air Force, whatever, bragging about the density of bombs on Dresden. Like, you don't have to do that. Anyway, U.S. forces stationed at Colonia Dublin were meant to be something of a threat, showing Mexico what would happen if they didn't take their mission of catching Villa seriously. Remember, this is they went back to the the government says they can capture Villa. The government's going to do it. Which, of course, Carranza did not care. He didn't give a shit. At this point, he knew, well, the army is not coming back. Like, they pulled back for a reason. We literally shot at them, and they shrunk at the challenge. So, like, they're not, even if we fuck around, they're not going to come at us for not catching Villa, right?
Right.
Skirmishes continued, and soldiers on both sides, and civilians for that matter, kept dying while achieving absolutely nothing. Which
yeah.
I understand. I just explained all of military history in that sentence, but, you know.
Yep. People die for no fucking reason. It happens a lot. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. Yep. After numerous, mostly pointless negotiations between the Mexican and American governments, the U.S. finally withdrew on January of 1917. Both Pershing and Wilson publicly called the expedition a success.
Well, whatever you want, I guess.
In case you're keeping track, they did not achieve its one singular goal, which is catching Pancho Villa. Neither did Carranza, for that matter. Pershing blamed Wilson for having too many restrictions on military operations. Does that sound familiar to anybody?
Oh, God.
I assume that restriction is the president didn't let me just do whatever I wanted.
I wanted to do war crimes.
I want a war. You have a war at home.
War at home sucks, Mom. Can we get Applebee's?
I mean, honestly, the expedition of Mexico is truly the Applebee's of American wars. I don't know how I'm going to rank the rest of them in comparison to fast casual restaurants, but I'll work on that for the future.
We'll figure it out.
Now, what's kind of incredible is, like, in his private letters, Pershing did not blame Wilson. He said that, quote, "We returned home like a whipped cur with its tails between its legs." So, like, yeah, he got beat. But it didn't matter. Pershing, no nickname given, became a national figure. Funston died of a heart attack as soon as the expedition was over. And that meant that Pershing would...
What a bitch!
Pershing pretty much rode clout to become the AEF commander in World War I. Like, there were significantly more accomplished generals in the U.S. military at the time, but everybody knew who Pershing was. So, like, you got it, sir. Like, that was it. And only a few months later, the American Expeditionary Force was in France. I believe it was like April or June the same year. It was only a couple months later. And thankfully, nothing bad ever happened in the U.S.-Mexico border ever again.
Nope. And the episode. And the episode for the eldest.
So how do you feel about this second Mexican-American War? That should be called that, but isn't.
Of course, we just did I love the story of the dudes just like hanging out and gambling. Just vibes.
Honestly, the army fucking up and the ending with soldiers not entirely sure why they're somewhere while also getting drunk and gambling pretty much covers my entire career. I don't know. Yeah. It was interesting to me to see just how backwards the National Guard system was.
Right.
And then, honestly, it would have been very interesting to see how badly World War I would have gone if we had not done this first. Right? Like, this is almost like a dry run for a lot of it. And like
a warm-up.
Yeah.
Like a tune-up, if you will.
You got to have a warm-up neighboring war before you go overseas and do war.
That's right.
And like the National Guard historian admits that pretty much, we learned how to mobilize people correctly and also not let a cousin with no knees enlist in the National Guard or whatever. So, Liam, we do a segment on this
Yeah, Joe.
show called Questions from the Legion. If you would like to ask us a question from Legion, donate to the show. Find me on Discord, slide into my DMs on Twitter or Patreon, preferably Patreon, and ask me a question that is not important and could be saved for a Q&A episode whenever we do one of those again. And this one is topical, I believe. Obviously, both of us are sports fans. What is making you mad about sports at this moment?
Jalen Hurts isn't very good. Ben Simmons exists. The fucking Stanley Cup final is Lightning Habs. The Phillies suck ass. But Kemba Walker broke my heart. Shit.
Hey, what did Kemba Walker do?
He just got hurt last year, and then they had to trade him, and it was just a bummer because he's my favorite player. Ben Simmons being on a max contract and just refusing to shoot the fucking basketball is pretty far up there at the moment.
I saw a clip of him like literally sitting out a whole play and not like doing anything, and it was pretty incredible.
He just does that. He just does that now. He's so afraid to like take criticism or miss a free throw that he's just like, I just won't play that.
Solid. I mean, you can't have bad stats
you're on a max contract
if you simply never play.
That's true. But like, you're on a fucking max. Like, get out there and miss. Like, you know, I would rather you like visibly like suck and at least start trying than like whatever the fuck this shit is. It's unwatchable.
I have to second the Stanley Cup Finals gripe, mostly, and I understand that due to COVID and their refusal to not do sports during a time of a pandemic meant they had to change how the playoff format was, effectively guaranteeing a Canadian team would go to the Stanley Cup Finals because that's the only way any of those mismanaged teams are ever going to make it that far is if it's gifted to them. Right. And the worst one made it, meaning it's going to be a fucking sweep for the Bolts.
Yeah, I know. And I just like, there's shit with the salary cap and like all that other dumb bullshit. It's just like, I'm so fucking tired of Steven Stamkos existing.
Yeah, and what sucks, another gripe is just generally Detroit sports in general currently. Obviously the Lightning.
Jared Goff, bud.
The former Lightning general manager Steve Yzerman moved back to Michigan and became general manager of the Red Wings. And the only thing that makes me mad right now is like Steve Yzerman never would have gone to Tampa Bay if Ken Holland, the old general manager, did not refuse to give up his spot.
Right.
And, you know, Steve Yzerman didn't have a ton of draft picks to choose from when he was in Tampa Bay either. He just is good at scouting and hiring good scouts and listening to them. That's not that far out of the realm of belief that we, like Detroit, gets a lot of the same players that the Tampa Bay Lightning now have and turn them into a fucking dynasty. And instead, we're going to be last place for like the next 10 years. But that's why I'm mad. Also, the Blackhawks covering up sexual assault in the NHL.
Hey, well, what's new?
Yeah. NFL and NHL shaking hands on that one. But anyway, welcome to the Lions Led by Hockey podcast. A podcast I wish I could make because I fucking love hockey. But Liam, plug your other show.
Well, there's your problem. It's a show about engineering disasters.
Listen to it, and
thank you.
It's good, and occasionally they allow me to come on it to pimp my books.
Oh yeah, we got to have you back on.
Also, thank you for everybody donating to the show. Donate the $3 level, and you get an entire new series called The History of Armenia once a month because I cannot possibly do another once a week show. Liam, thank you for joining me on this, your first series of 2, your duology, the Liam duology.
Thank you for having me. And this is now Liam's Led by Donkeys.
Liam's Led by Donkeys. Until next time, everyone. Don't do anything the National Guard did in the last 2 hours.
Try not to invade Mexico.
Later.